As usual, we do record this, so just to make a note of the fact that this is being recorded. Attendees are all muted, but that doesn't mean that you can't speak up. As we're going through this, if there's questions that are coming to mind that you would like to ask, just use the raise your hand feature. I can unmute you and allow you to ask your question verbally. Or you can also use the chat room to post a question in the chat. Ben, if you could for me monitor the chat. If a question does pop up on chat, flag me down and we can pause and answer the question. Thank you for joining. This is the Mavenspire Lunch and Learn Bites series. We do this on a monthly basis. All of these are recorded as well. So if you did register and we're unable to attend, not to worry, we actually do post the recordings of these webinars on our YouTube channel. So if you missed it, be on the lookout for our next newsletter, and in our next newsletter, there will be a link to our YouTube channel for you to go back and rewatch the video. Today, we're going to be covering anatomy of an incident response plan and just going through just insights right into the incident response planning process and what to prepare for. When you think about incident response planning, and we kind of jokingly put a little picture over here on the left side of this slide, this is your break glass in case of emergency moment, right? Hopefully, when you're breaking that glass, it's not to reach for a bottle of alcohol, right? The reason you'd want to have a good documented incident response plan is so that you can save the drinks for the celebration at the end. The fact of the matter is, although it is becoming obviously a lot more common to have an incident response plan, there are still a lot of organizations out there that just simply don't have one. Or if they have one, it's not well documented, or in some cases, they have one, but it's unfortunately been stored in the wrong places. So if you think about what would happen, why would you want an incident response plan? The reasons are fairly simple. It's bringing organization to chaos, right? Again, save the alcohol for a toast at the end of the panic. There's still going to be panic, but this is about if you were to be hit with a ransomware attack or cyber attack of some kind, that you at least have a plan in place to get through the process. You've got people organized, you've got roles and responsibilities very well thought out and documented so that everybody knows what their responsibilities are. In a lot of cases, and again, this is kind of goes back to things that are becoming more common, this is going to be a critical component to working with your cyber insurance company. Cyber insurance is a big thing these days. These cyber criminals are very well organized and very structured in how they do things now. These are no longer, some person in a basement somewhere. These are typically foreign adversaries, organized like a well-oiled machine, like a corporation. It's big business. And so, cyber insurance is a big thing, whether that be, covering the costs of the impact to the company, the risk to the company. Obviously, there's a lot of financial risk involved here, whether that be, the ransom you're being asked for, or the day-to-day operations that are impacted and obviously costing a company or an organization revenue in the process, impacting both the company and its customers. So think of having an incident response plan as, if you're going into a hospital for surgery, the paperwork forms are already filled out, right? There's no headache of figuring out how do we respond to this. You've got an incident response plan in place that is, again, well documented. And now you can just kind of go through and start going through your process. Still, there's going to be panic in the mix, obviously, because obviously, plain and simple, right? Your company's at risk, your data's at risk, and so you have to move into action very quickly. But now you can do it with a plan in a very organized fashion. When you look at the different incident response frameworks, these are two examples here from NIST and SANS. You'll notice they're fairly similar. Some a quick glance, they almost look the same, but there's subtle differences. When you look at them side by side, you'll see the components differ slightly in their wording and grouping. The biggest difference lies in step 3, where NIST believes that containment, eradication, and recovery overlap. What basically what they're saying is, don't wait to contain all threats before beginning to eradicate them. Where SANS recommends basically separating those out and not starting one until you've done the prior. So containment first. Once you have validated that it's fully contained, then you can step through to eradication, which is obviously removing the bad actors, removing the bad data from your environment, and then recovery. Quick note on our stance from a Mavenspire perspective. I mean, both of these are great frameworks, and you'll even see me make some additional references to NIST later on in the presentation here. But you definitely don't want to start recovery efforts while you could still have, bad actors in the environment. So, some you could argue one way or the other, and it could one framework could be a better fit based off of your organization. But at the very least, before you start actually doing any kind of recovery efforts, you definitely don't want to be doing recovery efforts while there could still be the risk of a bad actor in your environment with visibility to what's going on. You'll see some points made later on in the presentation around, if a bad actor is still in your environment and you're going through recovery efforts, they could follow you straight to your backups. So if you've got, you talk about incident response plans, you talk about disaster recovery and how that relates. Obviously, a good component within your incident response plan is that you do have a good disaster recovery plan around backup and recovery. So if they're still in your environment and they follow you, and you've got this great air-gapped backup solution, whether that be cloud-based or on-prem somewhere in a clean room, if the bad actor's still in your environment and you start recovery efforts, they can follow you to that air-gapped backup. So just something to keep in mind as you are kind of intertwining how your DR plan fits into your incident response plan. So what all's involved? And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about here as we go through the rest of this presentation, is really the things you need to be thinking about around how to put together a good response plan and really get started and on the path to either starting your first incident response plan or taking a look at what you do have in place and going back and doing a little bit of editing, updating, and improving on a current plan. So what all's involved in this? First and foremost, assets. What's your attack surface look like? Think about just a simple situation where somebody gets access to the network. The first thing that they're probably going to do is DNS and IP scans to look at, hey, what all can I see here? So, if you need to know what anyone would be able to see when they're coming into your environment, which basically means everything within the corporate IT infrastructure. So all of your hardware assets inventoried, right? Endpoint devices, servers, storage, networking equipment, basically everything plugged into the network. Software, all of the different software applications that are used. You think about two environments where there are, bring your own device. If that's something that's allowed within your organization, what kind of security policies do you have around that? Are you putting anything in place to assess those devices before you allow them onto the network? Is the network that you're allowing bring your own device type thing, BYOD devices, to segmented from the corporate network as a guest network? What kind of traffic is being allowed between those networks? So a lot to think about and unpack when you're looking at that piece of it. And then looking at the risks, right? Your inventory's done. Now what's monitoring all of this, right? Have we captured everything across hardware and software inventory? Do we know what's on our network? Do we know who has access to what? What kind of security policies are in place right now? And that's not really even about, do I have good security policies in place right now? It's just knowing where I stand right now that's the only place. That's the place we have to start to figure out if there's gaps that we need to go address to get better. The incident response team. Who are the quote unquote voluntold, who are the lucky folks that get to be a part of this whole process if we are impacted by this type of situation. Who all's on the team? What are their responsibilities? Are they prepared to execute on those responsibilities? And so we need to know who that is, and make sure that they're up to speed and know what their role is. Communication is another big part of it. How do you communicate what's happening to your employees within the organization? This is really important because if there is a threat or risk that has been identified, and even you're at the point where maybe you don't know if you've been impacted yet, but there's evidence that shows that there could be some sort of an issue. How do you communicate what's going on with your employees to start the process of figuring everything out? If you are impacted, what steps do they need to be taking? How are they going to be impacted with regards to performing their day-to-day roles and responsibilities of their job? And then looking at, communications additionally externally, right? If this is something that's going to be obviously impacting to your day-to-day business operations, how do you communicate that to your customers? So that's, again, an important piece of this plan, so that ahead of time, based off of the severity level, this is what I'm going to communicate internally. This is what I'm going to communicate externally, and then having a chart to basically understand at what point do I need to provide more detail, more basically steps for employees and or customers to follow as I go through the process. This basically relates to DEFCON levels. When you look at it, okay, so we've got the potential that something has happened here or something has happened here. Now we need to identify and categorize it. So what to recognize here. You'll see a little chart here. I relate this to DEFCON levels. And then you take those DEFCON levels and relate them to costs, right? If you look at it, obviously DEFCON 1 being something very major, where critical systems and data are impacted, obviously the cost is going to be much, much higher. And it's good to understand as an organization, and go through here and make your own chart of these different DEFCON levels, and then get a little granular on what are those actual costs if we are impacted. So if it's critical systems and data, how does that impact? I'll use the example of an online retailer, right? If an online retailer is suddenly offline because their critical systems have been impacted, and now their e-commerce website is offline or at risk, right? That's going to cost them money, right? They're no longer processing orders and bringing in revenue. So that's just one example, but again, that gets back to relating it to DEFCON levels and the financial impact to the company. This also gets back to the cost of getting out of it, right? The cost of your cyber insurance policy, what they're knowing and understanding what they will and will not cover with regards to these costs. So it's definitely very important to part of your plan to figure out, how do we categorize these from a DEFCON level? What are those associated costs, which obviously is going to relate back to what we classify as the DEFCON level, so that we can fully identify when something happens, how serious is it? Here's some examples, and this is highly dependent on really kind of the size of organization. Just examples of how do you organize an incident response team, and these are more about examples of kind of the makeup of your incident response team and plan. Top one on the list, a centralized incident response team. This is a single team that handles it from the time an incident happens until it is recovered. So this could be a small group within the company. I don't know, let's say 5 people, right? A single team, everyone is basically in action and ready to go and collaborating together. A distributed incident response team structure is where you actually, this is probably the example, or not probably, but definitely the example of much larger organizations that have multiple sites, remote offices, things of that nature, where you're still going to have a core incident response leader, that's working with these distributed incident response teams. But if you're spread out, you've got different sites, remote offices, things of that nature, that may call for having multiple response teams that are site responsible, and then you've got a central coordinator that's coordinating all of those efforts. And then these last 2 examples here are partially outsourced and fully outsourced. And obviously these can mix in whether you've got a central incident response team or you've got distributed multiple incident response teams across multiple sites across the organization. Figuring out as a part of your plan, do you have all of the people, all of the experts within your incident response team that have the expertise, the know-how, the certifications to go through an incident investigation, recovery, all those things. And if there are gaps, you definitely need to understand where you do have gaps and see, where you can look at a third-party advisory organization. And Mavenspire obviously is an organization like this, where you can partially or fully outsource your incident response. This is, the nuts and bolts of, finding an issue, and seeing that something may have happened, investigating and confirming that, hey, we do have a security breach, and then beginning the process of coordination with local law enforcement, potentially federal law enforcement, as well as our cybersecurity insurance company. So again, that could be a partially outsourced or fully outsourced, depending on how you what the gaps are within your organization and the skill sets that you have within the people on your incident response team. So kind of going back to the DEF CON levels a little bit and building out that severity table. You look at this, I talked a little bit on, or a lot of it on that slide about associating the cost with what's happening. How critical is it? What's the cost to the company? What I didn't talk about there was time. This obviously, if you were to be hit with a ransomware attack, probably the first thing on your mind is how long is it going to take to get through this, and there's no definite answer to that. It depends on how bad of an impact it is, what they've gained access to, and how long the investigation is going to take. And so this goes back to those frameworks of the steps you go through, and how quickly can you find, identify, remediate, and then get to your recovery phase to actually get production systems back to work and get back into day-to-day business. This could be hours, this could be days. I didn't put it on the slide here. This could be weeks in some situations, depending on how long it takes to get through all of this. And some of that obviously depends on the size and the complexity of your organization and your infrastructure. So when you look at this, is it bad enough that containment means, in order to stop the evil from spreading, it's time to cut the cord, right? In a lot of these situations, the first thing you're going to be doing is pulling the plug on internet, right? If the bad actor's in your environment, watching as they spring their attack, obviously the quickest and easiest way to cut them off from being able to watch what's happening when you're identifying and remediating the issue is to cut the cord on internet, right? So you're going to be isolating your environment, which again is going to cause you to be down. Day-to-day business is obviously going to be impacted. And now, how quickly can we contain, isolate, remediate and get to our recovery process. Documentation, right? This kind of starts to pivot into, and we're going to go into this into more detail, the evidence collection phase of this. When you look at what things you're going to be needing to start that process, starts with documentation. You're going to be pulling logs. You're going to be documenting the financial damage, going back to time and cost, and working with your cyber insurance company. You need to be documenting, to the penny, how much financial damage is happening as you go through this process. So, what to know about evidence collection? When you look at evidence collection, it kind of goes infrastructure, your IT environment. A lot of the examples used here are some of the basics, right? Physical media. This could be, the hard drives and computers and mobile devices, external storage, speed drives. And kind of going back, I've talked a little bit about personal devices, BYOD devices in the work environment. Thinking about something like a USB drive, for example. It could be an employee's personal USB drive that they've used on their company issued laptop. It's not uncommon that, if you allow employees to use things like USB drives in your environment, if it's something, maybe they've used it for some personal use on their personal systems at home, but they also plug it into their work laptop from time to time to copy data back and forth between the work laptop or backup sub project or something like that they've worked on to a USB stick. It could be that the bad actor got into your environment through that process. It could be that that employee had a personal system that was impacted by a cyber criminal that planted something on their USB stick that inadvertently made its way onto your network, and now they just hit the honey hole, right? The money pot, if you will. So things to think about. Again, kind of going back to the security piece of this and what you're allowing to traverse your attack surface. Again, that's a risk when you're allowing personal devices to be given access to the corporate network, or even things as simple as a USB drive of a personal nature being plugged into a corporate device. Digital images and files are produced when digital evidence is copied from the physical media or other systems. These can be copied and backed up. You think about, what is my total environment? It's the physical infrastructure on premises, but if it could be also cloud-based systems. So if you've got virtual servers sitting up in Azure or any other, Google Cloud, AWS, wherever, right? Those are a part of the environment. That's also a part of the evidence collection. So it doesn't matter if it's on-prem or in the cloud. It's a part of your corporate IT infrastructure, and it's impacted. And so you got to be thinking about how to collect evidence from all parts of the environment. And then law enforcement, as they get involved and begin their investigation, there's going to be digital evidence that they produce. It could be, literally body-worn cameras on them as they're walking into your environment. They're going to save all of that, and all of that is going to be backed up and stored as evidence, and then pictures, things of that nature, and any kind of data that they pull out that they tag for evidence is going to be backed up here. So these are some of all the different digital evidence components to be thinking about. Following best practices for evidence collection is definitely high priority. It's absolutely a must. Any hiccups in this process could cause headaches with your cyber insurance company. It could cause headaches with your recovery process. You want to make sure, and this kind of goes back to thinking about the roles and responsibilities of the people on your incident response team, is do you have somebody as a member of your staff who is certified in digital forensics? That's something that you're cyber insurance company will want to see. So whether that's somebody on your staff or somebody that you source from a third party, you definitely want somebody a part of that evidence collection process to be certified in digital forensics. Another requirement is third-party verification. Right, you're investigating your own crime scene. It's one thing for you to verify and validate that you've identified and removed the attacker from your environment. But you additionally do need third-party verification that what you've done, what you've investigated and remediated and recovered from, that you have third-party verification that says, yep, I went through this. I looked at everything that was done here. Everything was done properly, and I concur with the company's stance that they have remediated this, and it is no longer a threat. Basically the last thing you need is corruption in the evidence collection process that causes issues, whether that be with law enforcement individuals and the investigation as a whole, or your cyber insurance company. And I've referenced again another NIST document here, and you can go to their website and download. This is a pretty, if you're looking for some light reading, and that is a joke, it's definitely a long form reading, but definitely, as you're thinking about this is a good resource to go in and just learn a little bit more about preservation of digital evidence. And so it's a good document. It's actually fairly recent on the NIST website, where you can go and download this report at no cost. It's just something that they share as a best practice document. So definitely recommend going and taking a look at it. And just if it's not something you've thought about, if you're not sure if you've got anybody in your environment that really is equipped to handle evidence collection in the result, as a result of an attack like this, it's definitely something to get up to speed on. So remediation, right? So we've, at this point, you've kind of gone through and you've identified, you've contained the situation, right? Evidence collection has started. It can kind of going back to what are the things that are going on to lock things down, right? At this point, we need to be thinking about things like all of our passwords are changed, right? That attacker got into this environment. Even if we've got them out, they collected. We have no idea, or through the evidence collection, we maybe have some idea, or a pretty good idea. But the point being that the passwords is probably one of the things that they may have been able to get to, and so you want to start the process of having employees going through, all IT admins and users going through and updating their passwords, and more importantly, too, having a little bit better stringency, if you will, around the password policies. If you think about some of the easy ways that attackers get into environments, it's when you have people who are using very basic passwords, or they're using the same password across multiple applications, multiple web logins for online accounts, things of that nature. And so it's one of those things where one hacked password by somebody who's using the same or similar password across multiple parts of the environment that they have access to, things could get hairy pretty quick. So other than just changing the passwords, it's about reinforcing policies around password complexity and simple things like not using the same password for every different account you have to log into. And thinking about this too, your primary systems are still stuck in evidence. I haven't, we'll talk about it here in a second. I think we get into it here on the next slide. But as we're going through this process of your plan, and you've identified the threat, you've gone to contain the threat, you've gone to remediate. Throughout that part of the process, you're not restoring back to your primary systems, right? They're stuck in evidence. So and going back to federal or local authorities being a part of the investigation, your own internal investigation that's going to be required along with the cyber insurance company, right? Your primary systems are stuck in evidence, so it's not like you're recovering back there. So kind of going back to your disaster recovery plan, um, without a good disaster recovery plan, these things are very much related between IR and DR plans, and so you definitely need to have a thought process as to where am I going to recover to, right? If my primary systems, on-prem data center equipment being the primary example, are still stuck in evidence, I can't start using them until federal authorities say, hey, okay, we're done, investigation complete. You can now use the equipment again. So I've got to get back up and running somewhere. So again, DR planning is a big piece of this. And so you jump into again, recovery, jumping in post evidence collection. And now where can I go and recover to? And there's some different options here. The thing to think about is, the best defense against the bad guys getting in and launching a ransomware attack on your environment or any kind of data breach is having a good DR plan, and how, whether that's on-prem or cloud-based workloads, are the backups air gapped, meaning that you have a plan where the backups are immutable. You have a clean room environment, and again, when we use the term clean room, the clean room environment could be a recovery space in a cloud-based scenario where I'm bringing, even if it's on-prem backups, I'm bringing up DR recovery in the cloud, or it could be a physical clean room in your environment where you have your backup devices that are doing your air-gapped backups, and then you have a clean room where you can go and actually restore your environment, whether you're, again, this is whether your backups are on-prem or cloud-based, restoring those back to clean room equipment and being able to test and validate that the backups are indeed clean, apply any security updates that need to be done prior to putting them in production, and then being able to put them in production. A couple of examples on this slide, and shameless plug on our Smart as a Service recovery as a service model, but we offer this. Yeah, there's other third parties that have some similar solutions, but basically, you can do either everything back up into the cloud, or you could do a hybrid scenario where you're doing some backups into the cloud and some backups on-prem. But more importantly, it's about, is there anything going on with regards to security scanning my backups as they're happening to make sure that no bad threat actors are in my backups, and then again having a clean environment to do restore. If you're doing it in the cloud, you're able to actually, and again, if you're doing that disaster recovery in the cloud, these could be backups of either cloud-based workloads or on-prem workloads, but you're doing your recovery 100% in the cloud because maybe you don't have the physical IT infrastructure to restore to, aside from your primary equipment that's stuck in evidence. And so now I can spin all these virtual systems up in the cloud, even if it was a backup of a physical server that was, nothing virtual going on there, a physical Windows server. I can take that backed up version of it and spin it up as a VM in the cloud. And again, being able to do this on-prem as well. And then once you back up and running, and again, before I jump into this, you've got production back up and running in a temporary space. And I don't think I mentioned it, but another thing that you to think about there too is if you're wanting to do it on-prem and you don't have the IT infrastructure, Mavenspire, in fact, has an infrastructure rental program, so you can actually, in some scenarios, if we're the advisory partner that you've chosen as a part of your incident response plan, we can actually do rental equipment to be able to temporarily restore your environment to. Post-incident review and improvement, right? You're back in operation. This is where you start thinking about things, and assessing really, how did it go? It was painful one way or the other. All right, we already know that, but what was the level of pain? What was the financial impact of the company? What parts of the plan worked flawlessly? and what parts of the plan did we have hiccups on. This is a lot of times, even with companies that do have an incident response plan, they look back and think, okay, were we practicing? Did we practice our incident response plan? What was the reality that we experienced versus what we practiced? Did everything go off without a hitch? And where were the gaps? And so at this point, you're conducting a pretty thorough review of your incident response plan and making all of the necessary improvements. And frankly, if you were not doing anything practicing these sessions before, you're probably going to put a plan in place going forward to practice and harden your IR plan as you move forward. So quick 5 things to get started. Again, going back to what we talked about before, full inventory of your hardware and software. Secondly, assess the security resources that you currently have and what are the gaps within either your current plan or the people on the incident response team that have to carry out the plan. What are the gaps there? Cyber insurance, right? Nobody wants it, but they still need it. So you need to assess your risk level. This is another thing that we can help you with as a part of our cyber risk scanning offering, where we can come in and actually analyze your attack surf, not only externally, but also internally, going back to some examples of attack surface within the IT environment, right? They maybe didn't get in through what they could see publicly, but what's privately seen within your environment. So that's something where we can do a cyber risk scan, give you your cybersecurity score, and give you feedback on areas of your environment where remediation can help you get a better policy, basically, with cyber insurance. Fourth, where do you keep your incident response plan? A lot of people make the mistake of keeping this on a local share on the IT corporate network, or keeping the only copies of it on end user PCs in the environment. Well, if your environment is impacted and you have somebody take control of your environment, you are probably going to lose access to your incident response plan. So where do you keep it? I know it sounds simple, it sounds basic, but again, sitting on a share on your corporate network or stored on local PCs that could also be impacted and lose access to, not necessarily where you want it. So, and also, if you have it there, bad actors can get in and actually see your incident response plan. So your incident response plan basically needs to be separate from your environment, stored in a safe, multiple locations, really, right? It needs to be on paper. If it's on digital media, again, it's separated and removed, air gapped, if you will, from the environment, and offsite. And then again, fifth, if you're lost, if you need help, identify a third-party resource for incident response advisory services. Obviously, Maven Spire falls into this category, and we are absolutely happy to help you out, whether that be helping you put together policies in an advisory aspect, or being a part of your incident response plan with our as-a-service offerings. So if it's something you want to talk about, definitely reach out to us, and we can set up specific meetings to dig into that for you. And I talked about it a little bit, but just kind of, again, this is kind of our commercial message here at the end around our advisory services and what I had already talked about with regards to being able to really look at your environment and go far beyond just giving you recommendations on how to put the things to be thinking about in your incident response plan. But if you want to engage us and actually assisting with you formalizing an incident response plan and being a part of the go forward plan, we can definitely do that for you. With that, that concludes today's webinar. I will hold real quick here to see if there are any questions out there. Doesn't look like we had any questions in the chat, and I don't see any hands raising up. I hope that this was good content. Again, just a note, if you for anybody that wasn't able to make the call or to stay the whole route of the call, we do save the recording of these webinars on our YouTube channel. And again, the link to that will be shared in our next newsletter. With that said, I will let everyone get back to their day. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Nicely done.
All right, hang on a second. Hey, you want to disconnect and reconnect on separate teams?
Sure.